So in the last video in this series, we talked about HTML and I kind of showed you all the tags you could potentially use to build out like a website. And again, I didn't show you all of them. I just showed you a subset of them. I recommend that you go and read on a bunch more of them so that you can get a better understanding of all the ones that you may use in the future. But using that information, we're going to actually try to build out some type of front-end application. I tried to think a little bit of what we should try to build, but I decided just to do something simple, something that you can all kind of relate to, and that is going to be a blog site. So I want to add the ability for you to log into your blog as an admin and actually like create posts, edit posts, delete posts, and whatnot, and then also have a public view so people can hit your site and they can see all the blog posts that you maybe posted and whatnot. So since you have that base understanding of HTML and how it works, and also you understand the tags, I think kind of building something using that information and just slowly introducing you to new ideas and new technologies is the best approach for learning. So let's just go ahead and dive right into trying to learn with that type of way. So I have a new file opened up over here, just an index.html file with a blank body and whatnot. And we are going to try to build out some key components that you may see inside of a blog, right? So the first thing I want to talk about is building out a header. So in the body, there is another HTML tag I did not mention in the last video, which is called a header. And technically you can use a div here. You can use whatever you want technically, but there's a couple of tags that you kind of want to use nowadays that kind of let other developers know like where in particular things are showing up on the page. Like there's a header tag, there's a footer tag. There's also a section tag, I believe. And I don't know if maybe the Google search engine might look at these as well and try to index your page. But so starting off, let's just do with the header. And we are going to build out like a top level navigation header. And I'm going to slowly introduce you to how to add styles because this video is all about styling. So in the header, typically you have like a logo and you might also have some links in the top header and maybe a search bar. If someone wants to search through all the posts that you have on your blog, it'd be nice to have like a search bar up there. So in the header, let's just go ahead and add a div. And that div is going to be a divider that's going to basically have a logo in it. So I'm going to type in like logo just so we know. And now that's going to show up on our page. And then secondly, I want to make another div in our header, and that is going to contain our links. Okay, so we talked about the A tag in the previous video. We can make a couple of links here. I'm going to leave the hrefs blank for right now, but I could put like an about page. I could put like a post page. I'm sure there's other pages that we might want to have in our application. But if you notice here, let me zoom in. We now have a div that's wrapping that logo text, and we also have a div that's wrapping the about and posts. Let's also add like an input up here, just so that people can type into an input box and maybe search your blog. And then also, if you have an input, it's probably nice to have a type of button, right? So I'm going to do like a search button here. So all of these tags we kind of covered in the last video, but the thing I kind of want to talk more about is like, how do these things lay out on a page, right? So if you see here, we just have some text on a page and it might not be apparent how this is all structured on the page itself. So let's just go ahead and go to our Chrome inspector. By the way, you can do Command Option I believe, to open that up, or you can right click on the page and say inspect element. But what we're going to do is just dive into these DOM elements and just take a quick peek at like where this stuff is laid out. You can see here we have a div that has a logo and then another div that's wrapping all this other stuff. So one thing I didn't really mention about the div is that when you put a div on your page, it's going to take up the full width of your page and kind of make everything else that comes after it, so every sibling that comes after the div, be rendered out on a separate row, I guess you could say. And that's related to styling. There's something called like display. You can do like block or inline block. And I believe divs by default are display of block. And then some of these other components are actually defaulted to a display of inline block. So if you actually click on a component here, let me raise this up so I can actually show you. If I click on like this A tag, and then I go to this computed tag here, I can type in display, and you can see that the A tag has a display of inline, and the div has a display of block, and input has a display of inline block. So you kind of have to learn and memorize what these different tags kind of default to, because depending on how the display is set, it's going to change the layout of your components. So we just learned this computed tab. there's a lot of stuff going on in this inspector here, but the element tag is a drop down you can use, or a tab you can use to kind of inspect individual elements on your page. And that's really good to kind of view the classes that are attached to it and what's going on. And then also you can view like the styles that are computed on that itself, right? You have styles tab here and a computed tab. We're going to look more at these in a second, but just keep that in mind with the display. So you'll notice here on the header, everything is like pushed to 2 lines, which is really weird. What we want to do is we want to push that all to a single row. And there are actually a ton of ways you can do this with CSS, but I'm just going to show you one using something called Flexbox. Let's just do some inline styles right now. Remember in the last video I showed you, you can actually add like a style attribute to your divs or your tags. And you can kind of put whatever CSS styles that you want inside of this inline style. So in this case, we're going to change the display from block, because remember, if you click on header here, the computed style happens to be block for the header tag. We want to change it to something else. So there's something called flex. And if you use that display, pretty much it's going to put all your components on the same row and kind of space them out. All right, so all of the children of your component are going to be spaced out with this flex display. This is a whole nother discussion, and it's probably going to take a lot of time to understand the different ways you can use Flexbox to kind of lay out your page. But this is an extremely powerful styling property you can use. So I think it's good if you start learning it now. So you'll find a lot in CSS and HTML that the layout of the page is really all about attaching particular properties to a parent tag. All right, so in this case, we're adding a flex property to the header, and the header happens to be the parent of these 2 nested divs. Now, if we were to zoom out just a little bit, I zoomed in like to 200%, you'll notice that it's all shoved over to the left of the page. I actually want the logo to be on the left and all of this, right? So if I were to highlight this div, I want this div to be pushed to the right of the page as far as I can. So there's a lot of ways you can achieve this. You can use like floating, you could use maybe absolute or relative positioning, but using Flexbox, there's actually a property you can provide it to tell it to put some space in between the children that it's kind of flexing with, right? So if you imagine that we want to put a div here, if I can comment this out, put some spacing here. That's what I'm trying to say. And it turns out with using Flexbox, there is a property you can use. So with CSS and inline styles, you can actually separate your styles with a semicolon. So after flex, I'm going to add a semicolon, and then I'm going to say justify content, and I'm going to put, I'm going to put space between. All right, so at that point, you'll notice that it pretty much took the div and the logo and it put a bunch of space in between them. Okay, so if you can kind of hover over these to get a better understanding of what's going on, but you'll see that the header is still the full width of the page, the logo is pushed to the left, and this is pushed to the right. So display flex is kind of confusing, but it's super powerful to understand because you can do a lot with layouts using it. So the next step is I want to make the actual header maybe like a cool color, or the background of my body a different color. And again, with inline styles, it's really easy to do. Just whatever element you want, you can add some styles to it. And it turns out that the body is wrapping like the whole page. You can see this little like orange and blue box. It's the whole page. Let's dive into that a little bit more. If you hover over the body, you'll notice that by default, the body has a margin of 8 on all sides. Usually this is strange, like you don't really want this. So what a lot of people do is on the body, they'll just say like margin 0, just to get rid of that weird like margin that's attached to the body. And then we can also change the background to something else. So I'll just say like background is going to be some type of gray. All right, so now what I want to do is I want to add some background color to the header itself to give it like a nice white. So on the header, we can just keep on adding some inline styles. So I'll say background is white, save that. And notice that now the header is a white and the background of the body is gray. So we can keep on styling stuff. I'm going to show you some more stuff in a second. So the next thing I want to kind of show you is some padding. Padding is basically taking that div or taking your DOM element, and inside of the boundaries of it, you're adding padding in. So that's going to push like the logo in, add some padding to the about and post. It's actually easier if I just show you this. So I'm going to say padding of 10 pixels and save it. And you'll notice that if I refresh, it kind of pushed some like padding around the entire div itself, right? So it's good to mention that padding is basically stuff that's inside of the rectangle, and margin is going to be on the outside of the rectangle, okay? We're going to cover margin and padding like a lot in this, so don't worry if it didn't make too much sense. All right, so now what I want to do is you'll notice that the about link and the post link is really close together. Let me zoom out just a little bit for you all. And let's say we wanted to add some space like right in between the about and the posts, okay? So like I want to add some spacing here. Another style that we have access to is called margin, okay? I kind of mentioned it a second ago, but let's just utilize that. And I will add a style attribute here, and I will say margin hyphen right is 10 pixels and save that. And you'll notice that the about link added some space to the right of it. In fact, I'll hover over this and just kind of show you. If you see here, you zoom in, you see like there is a orange little block to the right of about. Whenever you see orange in your DevTools, at least in Chrome, that is going to be margin. And then padding is going to be in the green, okay? So margin is what you can kind of do to kind of space elements out in between. So you could do the same thing with the other link if I wanted to. So I could add some margin here and save it. And that'll just put some space between the input box and the post link. Right, using white space in your application can help a user be able to quickly click links and not accidentally click on the wrong links. White space is your friend. Again, I'm not a UX designer, like I'm not a professional web designer, so there's a lot of stuff with design I'm not going to cover in this tutorial. I'm mainly going to show you the technologies to help you achieve whatever designs that you might need in the future. So let's just change logo to like my blog and save that. All right, so hopefully at this point you've started to understand how styles work, at least inline styles. And you might be thinking, okay, this is cool, but don't you think this is a little bit messy to have like all the styles nested directly on the component? And honestly, it kind of is messy. And this can become an unmanageable nightmare down the road if you have hundreds of pages with a bunch of styles just slapped onto your DOM elements. So typically what we do is we have an external style sheet or just some other style definitions that you can actually apply styles to your components without having to put them right on the DOM. So let's just cover that. I'm not going to do external style sheets yet because I think it's a little bit more advanced. But inside the head, I'm going to add another tag called style. And inside of this, we can start styling our different components here. Okay, let me zoom out just a little bit so you can see more text. Hopefully that's not too small for you all. Let me go ahead and move this over so my head is not potentially blocking all this code. All right, I hope that looks a little bit better. All right, so the style tag, if you wanted to do some type of CSS, but not necessarily put it inline on your elements, you can actually style components directly using something called like CSS selectors, right? So on the DOM, all these elements have different tag names, right? You have headers, you have divs, you have A tags, you have input. And using a style sheet, you can actually target those tags explicitly. So for example, if I want to target the header here, I could just type header, put a space, and do some curly braces. And I can actually copy and paste all of this styling and put it directly on the header itself and remove the style attribute from my header here. So if you notice on the right, the page looks exactly like it did before. Styles still look fine. But the main benefit of this, again, is that we're not muddying up our DOM, which pretty much makes it easier to read for other developers who might be working on your project. So let's just do the same thing for all these other things. Like I'll do a body here, and I could just go ahead and cut this style out and put it on the body. And then for the links, I'll kind of do the same thing. So I'll cut this style out. I'll put a link selector and I'll put that margin there. So I hope this all kind of makes sense. There's nothing really too extravagant going on here. All right, so on the right, the page is basically styled exactly how it was before, right? If I refresh the page, nothing is changing. And that's because we're applying the exact same styles to our components. But there is also an issue with this, okay? The main issue is we are styling tags at a global level. So let's say later on in our blog post, we also have a link somewhere. Like let's say we have a paragraph tag with some text that says like hello world, and it has a link in it that comes like in between hello world, not hell world. So if I save this, you'll notice that there's a ton of margin after posts here, right? That's not really what we want to do. And the issue, or the reason that's being caused, is because we are globally styling every link in our application to have that margin. So what you can do instead when you're using a style sheet is you could actually apply something called a class to all of your elements. So typically what we do is instead of targeting these DOM element tags explicitly or directly, you could just add a class to these. So I can actually call it header if I wanted to, or I can call it like my header. It doesn't really matter what you name it. And instead of targeting the header tag, I can do a dot, which represents like target the class. And I could say target my header and give it this style. So if I do this and save the page, the styles are still the same. But to fix the issue with the link, what I could do instead is give these links explicit names. So I could say class is equal to header hyphen link. And then I can style the header link and give that a margin right. So now if you notice, you save the page, this is actually good now. Like this doesn't have a bunch of margin. It's only these two who had that margin right applied to it. All right, so that is basically what we do. Body is something that you do actually target a lot explicitly. So we're going to keep that one. But you can actually take this a step further, right? So let's say you didn't want to give classes to all of these links inside your header. What if you just wanted to say, just give me all the A tags that exist in my header and give them some margin right? So there are more powerful ways in CSS that you can actually apply style changes. So instead of putting classes of a header link here, I can actually change this back to an A tag, but I want to say, give me all the links that are inside of my header. So I just basically put a space here and say my header space A, and that's going to target all the links that happen to be nested inside a component that has a class of my header. All right, have I lost you yet? I hope you guys are staying with me. There's also another way you can style things, which I don't recommend you doing, and other people don't recommend it either, but you can apply IDs to your elements, right? So I could say like my header here with an ID, and then instead of targeting it with a dot, which stands for target the elements that have a class, I could say target my element that has an ID of my header, okay? So same idea, this is going to basically just target the header that happens to have an ID of my header. Now, the reason we don't recommend that you ever use IDs that much, at least for styling, is that if you were to put IDs on something such as a link, there's a high chance that someone else could add another DOM element with the same ID, and you're going to get a lot of bugs, right? So we obviously, we don't like styling components with the ID necessarily. We like to use like class selectors. All right, so let me show you some more stuff that you can do. And I don't necessarily recommend that you always do this. Like if you follow something called BEM, you don't necessarily need to do these advanced CSS selectors and operators. But for whatever reason, if you need to, there's actually some cool stuff you can do with CSS, right? So if I wanted to, for example, target only the children of a particular tag or name, I could say like my hyphen header, and then I could say greater than sign, and then I could say A, and then I could say like color is pink. All right, so what that's going to do is going to look at your header, or look at any class that has a my header for a name of the class, and then only grab the siblings, like the direct siblings that have a tag, right? So if you notice, this isn't making about and post pink because these are nested in another component. But if I were to bring this up one more time up here, notice that it changed that link, right? This link is a direct child of header. I think I said sibling in the past. I didn't mean sibling, I mean child. This is a direct child of my header, so we're going to target it, right? And as you do more and more complex CSS queries, like you can see stuff that's like really crazy here, but I highly recommend that you don't do this stuff. Like it just makes your CSS really hard to understand and more hard to manage. So that is one thing that you can do. There's also the plus operator, which I'll show. This basically means target the component directly after, right? So if I wanted to add a class to like my blog, right? So I could add a class logo to here, and then I could say, let me go ahead and save this. I could say logo, and then I want to directly grab the next sibling of my logo, which would be this div here. So I could basically say logo plus, I want to get the div after it, and I could say like background is pink. Okay, so you notice that it will apply a background color of pink to this sibling that's directly after logo. Now the issue with doing this is that it's very common to come in here and you want to add something simple. Like let's say I wanted to add like some span here. Notice that my styling broke, right? Because I added some DOM element that broke my CSS. And that's why I also don't recommend that you do like this type of selectors either. There's also stuff that you can do like nth child, and that will do some more complex stuff. But again, this is like a beginner's course. I don't want to get too into the weeds of CSS. Honestly, I would recommend you just put classes on anything that you need to change the style of, and you will be in a good position to create more manageable code, right? You do have to write a little bit more in your DOM, but I try to shy away from doing things like this. And instead I would just say like my header link, okay? And then that is how you basically style these two links if you want them to be pink for some reason. All right. Okay, so I think that was a good overview of like, we did some inline stylings, we made a cool little header, we added some margin and some padding to the header and margin between the links. We changed the background color of the body using a tag selector. We also removed that default margin that's always on the body of an HTML page for some reason. I showed you how to do classes to style different things. I showed you how to use the hash symbol to target IDs or elements that have IDs. And then I also showed you a couple of more complex operators you can use in CSS, such as the plus symbol or the greater than symbol, or the colon operator, which you can do a bunch of different stuff with. But I think this was a good overview, and I want to continue building out this blog post by showing you more stuff. But I think that's like the gist of everything you might need. The rest at this point is just learning all these different properties you can use. You have like margin, padding, you have like text, font family, you have font weight, you have font size, you have underline, text decoration. There's a lot out there, and honestly, you just have to memorize them. The ones that you use most often, you will slowly memorize them because you use them so often. But if you wanted to sit down for like a week or 2 weeks and just memorize not all the properties, but a lot of the most common properties, I think it'll put you in a much better position to not stumble around trying to remember how to style some things. All right, so this video has been going on for a while now. I'm going to continue with the next video in this series where we're going to try to build out a nice looking blog dashboard, or like the home page of your blog, where it's going to show you a bunch of different blog posts that you recently done. And then you can click into those to actually read the full blog.